Hi, my name is Edith Bernson. We are in Oxbow at my shop called Just Bread. Just Bread started out as a sourdough bakery where I only baked bread. That's why I call it Just Bread. It was the only product I had. And then it grew from there into a regular bakery with lots of other items too. So I've got 3 categories of items that I offer. I got sourdough bread in different flavors and flours. The second category is small sourdough items, as I call them, that can include bagels, English muffins, buns, dinner buns, burger buns. And the third category would be treats, as in scones or cookies, which are usually not sourdough but can be sourdough. Well, the name Just Bread was kind of born out of necessity. I was applying to the farmers market in Oxbow to sell my bread, and they said, sorry, we've got so many bakers there, which only sold sweet stuff. And I said to them, but I'm just selling bread. It's just bread. It's not going to be any sweet stuff. So there was a name. There was another component that came to it. I wanted to do justice to all the whole grains that I use and that grow around here. So I found it is a just bread, doing justice to the grain that grows around us that we eat here. So I come from Germany and we eat a lot of whole grain bread. I only ate 100% whole grain breads in my childhood and growing up and later when we lived in Germany. And I had a hard time finding whole grain breads here that were really dense and dark. You can find rye bread, but it usually has a content of like 5 to 10% whole grain rye flour, which is really low. Put those whole grains into the bread because they're nutritious, they've got all the fibers, they're good for your guts, and they just taste good. I just missed the taste of whole grains. So I was lucky enough that my husband's family are organic grain farmers. So they grow spelt, they grow wheat, and they grow other grains. And in that circle of friends that we got into there, they grow rye, and I found a farmer in North Portal that grew einkorn and kamut in Ratville. So I kind of branched out a little bit, but all the grains that I get, the whole grains, are local to Saskatchewan, and I use them. They grow around us, they don't get transported from other parts of the world, and they're just absolutely delicious. Just Bread has 3 pillars of business. We've got this shop here in Oxbow where I bake out of, where I open the shops a couple times a week. Then we got the bread bus where we service the rural areas up to Mooseman, Carlisle, Kenosee on the west side. We go to Estevan, we go to Gainsborough, so almost to Manitoba. And I just drive around and service all those little communities around on those bread tours, as I call them. So sometimes I do a doorstep delivery, then people can online order in my shop, and I just drive it to their house. Sometimes I say, hey, I'm going to be in Kerryvale on a Sunday from 10 to 11, and they can come to the bus and just buy the bread products or whatever they want. And the third pillar is the farmers market. We go to Estevan, to Merrifield, to Carlisle, to Kerryvale when they have their trade shows, and those are a very important part of our business. The rural areas are quite underserved with good bread. You can go to other grocery stores, but usually you wouldn't find a handmade sourdough bread. You can go to Regina and find them there at farmers market quite often. But I found that here in this area, you don't have that. So I wanted to fill that gap and offer good sourdough bread to people. We came back to Canada in 2020. We lived in Germany for 8 years. My Canadian husband and I lived there for a while. And when we came back, my intention was to be a stay-at-home mom because we got 4 kids, so I wanted to spend more time with them after working full-time in Germany. And I noticed after a couple months, I just got a little bit bored because the kids were in school and I was sitting at home and what to do. Making some bread at home and gifting it to friends and family. And one lady, a family member who was involved in the farmers market, said, you should sell that. And I said, no way, no one would buy my German bread in Canada. She said, try it out. So, okay, I made the decision a couple of weeks later to go to Lampman, to my first farmers market, because they accepted me right away, and sold out the first time. And so I said, okay, I was just baking in my home kitchen, like 10, 20 loaves at a time. And it grew, and I had one oven, and then I had another one, and the markets just came, like Estevan came on top of it. Then I was accepted into the Oxbow Farmers Market, and then I went to Kerryville, and people just kept inviting me. So I couldn't even stop it, even if I wanted to, just stay small. But yeah, I just grew from there, and before I knew it, I had 4 ovens in my basement. It was terribly hot in there. I had tables, I had all the equipment that I purchased throughout the year, and yeah, my family was getting sick of me baking all day long. So then it was maybe a year and 3 months later that my husband said, you need to get out because you're consuming our whole basement. They wanted their rec room back. And he said, just go to Oxbow. There's a shop available where we are in now. And I still baked at home for another year and just hauled the stuff here to sell. So baked it at home, and I had just 1 shelf in this shop and sold it, and it was just a huge success. I didn't even think about, or I didn't believe it. But the support just from people coming here and buying my bread was just amazing. So this English muffin dough did rise for a couple of hours, and you can even pop it in the fridge if you want to work it the next day. That's what I did, just to keep it from rising too much. So you see how nice and fluffy that is. So I'm just going to flip this over, and what you can do at home is just use a regular rolling pin and roll it out to the thickness that you want them to be. But since we have larger quantities in the shop, I have a dough sheeter that I'm using. So before I roll out that dough, I want to spray my English muffin rings with some spray oil. Anything works there, but you want them keep them from sticking. I'm going to cut this in half because it's just a little bit too much for one rollout. And now the same applies here again. We want the dough not sticking on it. I'm just going to pour a little bit of rice flour on my conveyor belt here and roll this dough in it. And I just flatten it a little bit so it can go through the protection here. Now this is basically just a big rolling pin here. It saves me from doing all the manual labor, because if you need to roll 300 English muffins in a short amount of time, you can't do that by hand. So it's getting loud. And I just roll it back and forth a couple times and just adjust the thickness here with this handle. In the winter, I would probably leave it at 9 millimeters, but today it's a hot day. And just take a regular cookie cutter, which is just a little bit smaller than my English muffin rings, and just cut those out. And then just pop them in here. If you have them in this shape, you could bake them without any rings, but the rings just kind of limit the growth sideways when they're proofing, just to give them a uniform shape. But even without these, they're just going to be fine. They might get a little bit bigger. Now, if you find an English muffin at the market that has a funny structure, it's usually one of these doughs, but they're just as delicious, even though they're not smooth on the surface like the other ones. I wouldn't do this a second time because sourdough is not as forgiving as a regular yeast dough, so you don't want to be rolling that out too many times. So this is good for now. Now we let those English muffins rise for about 3 hours, and it depends totally on your ambient temperature in your house. They might take 7 or 8 hours, they might take only 2 hours, depending how hot and how humid it is in your house. So now what you would do with English muffins is you would bake them in a griddle, just raw as they are. But since I can't do that here in the bakery, I was inspired, and I learned from a different baker who baked them in these rings on just a sheet. We don't want them to build a dome, so what we need to do is put something on them to limit the growth while they're baking. So we take a parchment paper and then just put another sheet on top, so the maximum height they can reach is just about what you know from an English muffin. And that's the secret to keeping them flat. See if the oven is hot enough. Oh yeah. And I bake them at 200 degrees, that is Celsius. Alrighty, and never forget the timer. Okie dokie, and they can be in the oven now for 11 minutes, and then I just flip them around. Now the timer went off, our 11 minutes are over, and we want to flip those English muffin sheets around. Now we want to proceed with caution, let the steam out first. just gonna flip them around so that I can bake from the other side. Since we are baking in this bread oven, it has these stones that are heated up. So the heat will come mostly from the bottom to heat the sheet and then goes into the English muffin. All right, and we bake for another 11 minutes. So now, after 11 minutes on the other side, we're gonna take the lids off from those English muffins. And we're just gonna bake them for maybe 5 to 6 minutes just to give them a nice color on the top. So you see now they're nice and flat here, they didn't form that dome. Just give them 5 more minutes. So now we'll take a look. Oh, I think they're just perfect. So the color is nice, golden brown, so we can take those out. There might be a little variation in color, and that's fine because not every level of the oven is the same heat here. So now, just to get them out of these rings here, I just take them out. And then you want to get them out as soon as possible so they don't sit on the sheet much longer. And put them on a wire rack to cool down. Now we just want to take a look at these English muffins here. You see they have 2 nice flat sides, which is perfect for using them for like a McEgger or bacon and cheese or whatever you want to put on there. Even for a burger replacement, they're just fine. And just let them cool down a little bit and cut them with a knife and they're good to go. Fluffy, delicious, awesome. Well, when you grow up in Germany, you eat bread. That's kind of a given. You eat bread for breakfast, you eat bread for supper, and if you're lucky, you have a sandwich for lunch. So bread is a basic food group in Germany. We have 3,000 different kinds of bread registered in Germany. We call it the world capital of bread in Germany, right? And you cannot live in Germany without loving bread. So I eat bread for breakfast. My Canadian family doesn't like bread for supper too much, but sometimes I can sneak it in. Yeah, we just lived on bread because it provides all the nutrition you need. It has protein, it has carb, it has vitamins. Sourdough bread is a very old technique of making bread. It doesn't need any yeast. And when you think back of COVID, when there was no more yeast, sourdough bakers had no problem, because when you have a grain and you mill it up and mix it with water, in that grain is already a fungus, which is a wild yeast. And when you let it ferment, it starts growing. So it comes with the grain. Every grain has a different kind of yeast, and then you let it ferment and it leavens the bread. So in that wild yeast, they're farting. Those little yeast things that they fart build gas, and that gas leavens the bread. Thousands of years back, when people made bread, that was the only kind of yeast they were using. There was no commercial yeast like we know now, because you want the bread not to be so dense. When you think of a soda bread, that's not what we want to achieve. You want the bread to be nice and fluffy, and you want to like squish it a little bit, and that sourdough starter, that wild yeast, combined with the lactic acid bacteria in there, they make a perfect balance to leaven that bread and give it an amazing taste. There's often a confusion when I'm at the market and people that are new to my business say, "Oh, what do you have? Rye? And do you have sourdough as well?" And I say, well, the rye bread is a sourdough bread. Because sourdough, if you make sourdough bread, it's a method of making bread, it's not a flavor. You can make a rye sourdough, you can make a spelt sourdough, you can make a wheat sourdough, you can make sourdough with all kinds of grain that you have, einkorn, kamut, whatever you want. It just means you're not using commercial yeast. And you can mix any kinds of inclusions in the sourdough. You can put cinnamon raisin in there, you can put cheddar jalapeno, parmesan, whatever fruits or cheeses you like. I'm not a baker by nature. Never was, never planned to become. It just kind of happened that I was lacking the breads that I knew from my childhood, the sourdough bread, the whole grain breads in Germany. So I had to make them myself. It was just kind of necessity. And when I grew up, you only would find sourdough bread. Like my grandparents, I remember when they baked sourdough bread, they had loaves like this big. And then they would just slice a slice like this. It was kind of flat and long. And then you would put some salami or cheese on it and just fold it over, and that was just the best bread you could eat. Yeah, just delicious. And some people say baking is a science, and I agree to a certain point. You need to have the proper proportions of water, flour, and salt, otherwise the whole thing doesn't work. It doesn't work if you leave the salt out, then it rises too quick, so the salt kind of reduces or retards the fermentation. But if you have not enough water, it gets like a really stiff dough. So it is a little bit of calculating, yeah. The baking of bread I just really enjoy because it's quite simple. It's 3 ingredients, it's easily mixed. It takes a lot of time, but I could deal with that. And then just the texture of the dough is just so sensual. Like you touch the dough and it wiggles so nicely and it feels so good, and I just love it. Like it doesn't feel like work when I'm baking bread or when I'm making bread here. It just became a dream. So the first step in making Saskatoon and white chocolate scones is we have a dry mix of flour, baking powder, sugar, and a little bit of salt. And we want to take some frozen butter to cut into there. And we need about 1/3 of a butter for 1 batch of scones. I'm just going to cut this very carefully and put this back. And this butter was in the freezer for at least 2 days, so it's nice and rock hard. Now some people grate the butter. That is a good method too. I just find it a little bit too hard on my hands, and I had too many accidents with the grater, so I'm just going to cut it here really careful with a knife. And this knife is good for cutting butter because it kind of shaves it off in little shivers or slivers, I guess. And that's really good for the scones. You don't want them to be too small because you want them to like stay solid in the mix until they hit the oven. And then they're able to lift those scones like that. So now when you put that frozen butter into the mix, always just mix them up right away and coat them with butter so they're not sticking to each other. And I chose to make Saskatoon and white chocolate scones for very simple reasons, because we've got an orchard not far from here that grows Saskatoon berries. So I buy them from a local farmer. They're delicious. They have them year-round frozen in their shop. And I just love white chocolate. I can't deny it. So I thought, why not combine those two together? And it turns out everyone else likes it too. So that's the butter. And always just mix it right in. And then for 1 batch of scones, which makes about 9 scones, I use a whole bar of the good Swiss chocolate. Now you just need to make sure that you get a solid chunk of chocolate. You can't take the one that has like a soft core because they just bake away during the baking, so you're losing that chocolate. This one is really good because it stays solid inside, so when you bite in that scone, you hit a chunk of chocolate and just gives you a sweetness, because the Saskatoon berries are not too sweet. Now before I came to Canada, I never even heard of Saskatchewan, and then I end up here marrying a guy from Canada, and I didn't know there was something like a Saskatoon berry, and I find them to be really amazing and delicious. Get that coated with flour, and then I mix in the berries, about 120 grams of berries. Just mix it in, get them coated, because they are frozen too, so you want to get them coated as soon as possible, because in the heat of the bakery they thaw and will just stick together. Alrighty, now we need a wet mix, which is an egg, a little bit of buttermilk, and some vanilla mixed together. Just whip that up. We mix that in there too. And now time is of the essence because you don't want that butter to melt. So once you stir this up with the wet mix, you want to get on that really quick, mix it up, and then we have a special mixing technique once it's on the table. Just want to make sure you got all the liquids and the dried kind of halfway mixed up. Yeah, I like to use gloves when I mix this up because it's quite sticky. And I want to have this bench scraper ready to go. These are useful for bread, but also for scones. And now I'm just going to shape it into like a big clump. And I want to make sure that all the dry ingredients, the flour, it's kind of absorbed. And then I flip it onto the surface here. You see there's still a little bit of dry stuff, but that's just fine. And I have a little scoop with flour ready to go here. This is just a regular flour. Just in case it gets too sticky, I need that to cover it a little bit. And now I want to achieve like a layered look on these scones, and then I can rise really nicely. So once I have this flat, sometimes you see in recipe just to cut this up and bake it, but I like to cut it in half and just double it up, flatten it a little bit, get all that dry stuff on here on the berries that try to escape, and then just cut it in half again and layer that. And you see we've got a nice like 4 layers of that scone mix, and that should be enough for now. Just drizzle a little bit of flour on there. Just had to grab my rolling pin and just roll it out. And we want to be quite gentle with the scone dough. And then we roll it out to about 1.5 inches thickness, and then just cut it in the desired shape. I like the triangle shape, but any kind of shape is good. That's really up to you. And then I just lift them up with my bench scraper and put them on a sheet and place them about 1 inch apart, just so they have room to grow and the heat can get them from all sides. Now with this leftover, I'm just going to get that together again in a pile and just do the same thing again. I'm cutting it in half and layering it again. Now this is quite sticky here after a while, so I do use a little bit of flour just to coat it, because we don't want the rolling pin to stick on it. Flip it around, and this side can be one more time folded. Now those sheets of butter that we cut earlier are just laying in between those layers, and then during the baking the butter will melt and just lift those scones up, and that gives it its typical flavor and fluffiness and softness and deliciousness, and that scone feeling in your mouth that you want. So now if we count, we got 9 pieces of scones. Now this little bit is hard to shape, and it's going to roll it into a ball. That's always the baker's tax. That's mine. Alrighty, so now to get the top nice and crispy, I just use some cream, some heavy cream, and just dribble a little bit on the top here. And then if you don't want to bake these up right away, pop that in the freezer for a couple minutes, because we want to avoid that the butter melts. So I'm having here 3 more minutes, and then I can pop those in. They bake at 200 degrees Celsius too, and we'll give them about 16 to 18 minutes depending on how hot your oven is. And I always do 16 minutes and then check on them and give them a couple more minutes if needed. Alrighty, so let's see. Oh yeah, scones are ready. See how they turned out? Oh, beautiful. Golden brown, that's just what we want. The butter is all coming out of it, just perfect. Now once you get them out, you want to lift them up right away because they get quite sticky once the butter solidifies again. And then give it a little bit of time before you bite into them, though they're really hot right now. It is an absolute surprise to me how well received my bread is. I was amazed how much they would like a whole grain loaf. And having this bread here, even just providing it to my family to give them good bread, what I think is good bread, it just, makes me proud to have them eat it. My hope for Just Bread is that it stays as busy as we are right now, and that we can offer more bread tours in the future, maybe have regular tours on set days. And I'm hoping to maybe open another shop in Estevan, or we'll see in which directions we can grow. Like, I see potential there. I've got a good customer base in Estevan. Yeah, we'll see what the future brings. I never plan too much ahead of time. I just go with the flow and find out where this journey takes me. So we have a physical location here in Oxbow, and you can come here Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Sunday mornings. And then we're also on Facebook, the website, www.justbread.ca. If you ever want to have some bread, just stop by Wednesdays, Thursdays, or Sunday mornings and try out some bread, some English muffins, or some scones.